Chapter 501, Bait Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. After sending out the telegram and cleaning up the desk, White Shark Hamilton relaxed completely. He was finally in the mood and had the ability to think about the details of what had happened to him. The first question that popped into his mind was, what about the bouncers outside? He propped himself up with both hands and walked heavily to the door. When he opened it to take a look, he found that several of his men were standing there unsteadily, telling each other jokes involving women. Hamilton's anger rushed to his head, but he soon calmed down. The muscles on his face twitched slightly as he pounded on the open door. Thump. The bouncers were startled and instinctively turned to look at the door. "Boss, boss," seeing who was making the sound, they hurriedly stood there and stammered. White Shark took a deep breath and asked, "Did you see anyone enter my room?" "Yes, Lardero." He said that there was a situation downstairs. The bouncers were confused by the question. "Boss, you were the one who let him in." As soon as they finished talking, they suddenly thought of other explanations and asked, "Boss, was something inside stolen?" Hamilton's expression sank, and he shook his head. "Don't doze off." Thud. He drew back and closed the door, leaving the few bouncers puzzled as they exchanged looks, suspecting that their boss was drunk. In the room, the tall and fat Hamilton frowned and started pacing back and forth. Lardero, Lardero, they saw Lardero. That guy, can he change into someone else's appearance? As a collaborator who helped pirates sell their loot and gather intelligence, White Shark Hamilton was no stranger to all sorts of sea rumors. The first thing he thought of was the former pirate Admiral Kalangos, who was said to be capable of turning into anyone. However, he quickly made more connections. It might not be this mystical ability. If it's really close to the description in the rumors, illusions, cues, and mental manipulation can all do similar things. There's something amiss. That fellow appeared refined and gentle on the outside, but he's inwardly mad and has terrifying strength. With the character he showcased, he should have knocked unconscious or killed anyone who had seen him, before strolling to the door and very politely knocking on the door. If it's to avoid creating a huge commotion so as to not leave behind too much information or exposing secrets related to his sequence, then he could have used a more covert method, like climbing through the window. Very contradictory. There's only one explanation for this contradiction. He was putting on an act. Was he disguising his personality or disguising his strength? Or both? When he thought of this, Hamilton suddenly stopped and put all the details together. That guy is a novice. His madness is a disguise. His strength is demonstrated by relying on some mystical item. Yes, that must be it. This can explain the contradictions. He didn't climb up the walls and enter through the window, because he's a low-sequence beyonder, and he isn't good in such aspects. The focus of his mystical item isn't in this domain. In order to successfully enter my room, he was willing to lower his head and address me as boss, because he was purely relying on the mystical item. He wasn't too confident about himself and doesn't have enough pride and madness. He acted like a madman so as to match the mystical item's effects of generating horror in others. He created pressure to ask for information. This can also perfectly explain why he left just like that. The reason why he came to find me is because he obtained such a powerful mystical item. With his elevated ambition, he wants to capture and kill some pirates to make a fortune. Once he knew that I'm serving Silver Coin Viper Odor and Admiral of Blood's intelligence officer, Old Quinn, to the point of being involved with the Queen Mystic, he got scared and fearful, so he chose to leave after acting perfunctorily. He didn't dare to kill anyone. The more Hamilton thought, the closer he felt to the truth. He hurriedly set up the radio transceiver again and flipped through the passcodes and added a telegram to concisely describe his theories. He didn't believe that he was being targeted by a hunter, because everything that had happened was a result of the inflated ambition of a young man who simply had a fortuitous encounter. He also gave the corresponding characteristics of the target. Blonde, blue eyes, not crazy, and even a little timid. Possesses a rather mystical item that might allow one to change their appearance and create illusions. In consideration of the sense of horror, the latter is more likely to be true. He's just a novice who doesn't have much experience. He specializes in mimicking a powerful aura with the help of the item. He knows a thing or two about me, and he doesn't look like an outsider who's here in Demir Harbor for the first time. Tap. 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 Hamilton stopped his finger and leaned back in satisfaction, his chair creaking under his weight. The corners of his mouth curled up a little, as though he had already seen the ending of that bastard from just now. It wouldn't end well for a fellow with a very low sequence despite possessing a powerful mystical item at sea. Many greedy sharks would rush towards him. When the time comes, I'll no longer have to worry about my problems being exposed. Under the night sky, the harbor was rather quiet. After leaving the Flying Fish and Wine, Klein made a detour in the distance. He first walked quickly before moving slowly, his pace gradually turning into a stroll. When he was sure that no one was following him, he turned his face back to Gehrman Sparrow as he passed through the shadows. He stuffed the hem of his shirt into his trousers. He adjusted his sideburns and took out his gold-rimmed glasses, placing them on the bridge of his nose. It gave him a coldness despite his refined appearance. He began to rely on the stars to find his way back to the white agate. As he walked, he let out a soft chuckle. Amidst the cold wind, he leisurely thought, I hope White Shark isn't that foolish and is able to see the flaws I left behind. The persona he had set up tonight was of a new adventurer who lacked experience and made mistakes. And this person, on the other hand, knew a lot about Demir Harbor and White Shark. He had a tempting mystical item on him which had messed with his mind, making him a little crazy deep down. Klein's initial idea was that pirates would wander around the ocean, and even the Navy would have a hard time finding them. If he could get more accurate information from White Shark, he could of course go straight to them. If that didn't work, his identity could be used as a bait to lure some knowledgeable pirates to a predetermined location to complete the initial hunt. When it was discovered that White Shark could contact Old Quinn, the intelligence officer of Admiral of Blood, Klein's plan was completed. His acquisition of the passcodes and the frequency spectrum had allowed him to monitor the corresponding situation and grasp the target's movement. Then, by interfering with the divination of others, he could, at the most appropriate time, use the combination of having a powerful mystical item and being a weak adventurer as bait, to catch a number of big fish. Now, the problem I have is that I don't have the equipment to monitor their communications. It's basically impossible to buy it at sea. I'll have to use the world's identity to get Miss Justice or Miss Magician to buy one in Backland. I'll receive the delivery via a sacrificial ritual. This is the advantage of the Tarot Club. With this in mind, Klein sighed. Seeing the white agate in sight, he quickened his pace a little and found that Donna's family and Clevy's were returning from another street. Clevy's greeted him by nodding his head. Just like when they officially met, he said in a low voice, I heard there was trouble at Flying Fish and Wine. Very well informed and rather familiar with Demir Harbor. Klein smiled and replied, I only taught 2 cheats a lesson. Clevy's brows twitched slightly, suddenly feeling that his impression of Gehrman Sparrow was a little wrong. After his previous observation and interaction, he felt that, although this young adventurer was a bit sharp, a bit reserved, and a bit cold, he could still be considered someone who smiled, was polite, and knew when to advance or retreat. But now, he was a bit uncertain. He felt that there might be a hidden flame of madness hidden in the recesses of his heart. At this moment, Donna's father interrupted, Mr. Clevy's, who is this? A colleague, Gehrman Sparrow, Clevy's introduced in a very simple manner. With a polite smile, Klein extended his right palm. It's my honor to meet you. In the future, if you need anyone, and if you can't find Clevy's and the others, you can consider me. No problem. I hope you're as strong and professional as them. Donna's father shook hands with Klein with apparent warmth and introduced himself, Bertie Branch. Klein had just released his grip on the box when his spiritual perception was triggered. He felt that there was something strange inside the gift boxes the branch servants were holding. He quietly activated his spirit vision and discovered that the gift box contained strips of cured meat. However, the surface of the cured meat had very rich colors at the red, white, and black spots. They were things from the spirit world. There's the aura of the spirit world, but they're practically harmless. This cured meat is very special. Klein was surprised. Noticing his gaze, Donna's father laughed and said, "This is a specialty of Demir Harbor. In the center of the island, there's an extinct volcano. There are a few cracks in the surrounding underground caves where a natural hot wind blows. Curing meat there allows the meat to gain a wonderful and unique flavor. It can be used as gifts for friends. Mr. Sparrow, if you wish to buy some, it's not too late." Unique flavor. The taste of the spirit world? Klein had a rough idea of what was going on. According to theories in mysticism, the spirit world completely overlapped with reality without interfering with it. One had to rely on the strength of a beyonder to open up a gap, but this wasn't an absolute situation. There were places in the world which had the spirit world being strong enough to slightly influence reality. In such regions, it was very easy for the dead to turn into water ghosts, zombies, and the like. There was also a non-trivial possibility that residences in such areas would have paranormal activity. A similar situation should have occurred in the interior of Demir Harbor's underground caves, but it's not serious and doesn't cause any abnormalities, only giving the cured meat a unique flavor. There wouldn't be any problems if one doesn't eat too much of this in one sitting. Klein responded with a smile. "I'm not interested in cured meat." Only at this moment did he finally confirm that the cured meat that the bartender had previously served him was ordinary and nothing special. At this moment, the little boy, Denton, pointed at the moon in the sky and said, "It's so very red." "Yeah." Donna nodded in agreement. "Very red?" Klein looked up and saw that the red moon was no different than usual. Because a child's spirit is relatively pure, he temporarily possesses certain spirit vision powers after being tainted with the spirit world's aura from eating such cured meat. Would the children on this island be in a similar situation? This might be the source of Demir Harbor's folklore. Klein observed for a moment and found the answer. The group strolled back to the ship, moving up the gangway and arriving on the deck. Klein bade them farewell and went to the second-class cabin. Suddenly, his mind stirred and he once again activated his spirit vision. He saw the huge skeleton messenger appear in front of him and drop a letter. Chapter 502, The Scene in Azek's Memories. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Pa. Klein stretched out his hand and caught the slightly heavy letter. The large skeleton messenger didn't stay, and it immediately disintegrated into a fountain of bones. One bone after another fell to the deck and disappeared, as though it didn't want to stay a second longer. With the letter firmly in his hand, Klein didn't lower his head to examine it. Instead, he instinctively turned around and looked at the wooden staircase leading to the first-class cabins. He saw Donna and Denton with their eyes wide and mouths agape, as though they wanted to scream at the sight of the scene, but everything they saw was over before they could make a sound. As a result, they even wondered if they were hallucinating. The children who eat the special cured meat in Demir Harbor gain temporary spirit vision to a certain degree. Klein's brows twitched slightly as he raised his left hand's index finger vertically and placed it against his mouth to silence the two young ones, just like he did while the Murloc hunt was happening. The already rather tall Donna immediately raised her hand and covered her mouth. She nodded in fear and excitement, indicating that she understood. When she looked diagonally down, she saw that her brother was still in a daze. She quickly grabbed his arm and pushed his hand against his mouth. Clevis and Cecile sensed that something was wrong with them. They stopped and looked at Klein, but they discovered nothing. Facing their stares, Klein calmly nodded and continued walking to his room. A gold coin had appeared in his hand without anyone realizing. It was tossed up, and it tumbled around as though it possessed life. Ding! The gold coin landed with a number facing up, indicating a negative result. This meant that the tiny episode wouldn't be detrimental to Klein. Seriously, the current messenger isn't polite at all. It's not like the previous one who would tap my shoulder or nudge my body to give an advance warning, or just convert my surroundings into a spiritual world to prevent ordinary people from seeing him. Klein lampooned as he took out his key and opened the door. He sat down on the edge of the low bed, lit a candle with only half its length remaining, and opened Mr. Azek's response letter. As he pulled out the items inside, the first one that caught his eye was the Dark Emperor card. Looking at that face which pissed him off, Klein let out a breath of relief and eased his worries. He wasn't afraid that Mr. Azek wouldn't return it to him, as he had that minimum level of trust. After all, the potion formula and corresponding rituals could be copied, and only the convergence properties of high-level materials couldn't be imitated. And since this was clearly not Azek's pathway, nor was it one of the switchable paths available to him, so a powerhouse like him had no need for it. Klein was worried that the messenger would be robbed, losing the card of blasphemy which would help him tremendously while in his spirit-body state. This wasn't impossible. The number of strange creatures in the spirit world was hard to count, so it isn't hard to end up having a few who were good at locating messengers and robbing them. The Dark Emperor card was returned along with the copper whistle from the numinous episcopate. After temporarily putting away these two items, Klein unfolded the important letter and read Azek's reply. That card that depicts the Dark Emperor reminds me of certain scenes. The tall as mountain Blood Emperor who wore a red cape with his eyes being abnormally crazy, containing almost zero reasoning. He was on the brink of losing control. There was the true Dark Emperor who had revived. He sat on a gigantic throne, overlooking the land. When I looked up at them, I lost consciousness when the Blood Emperor looked at me. I should have, in some form, participated in the War of the Four Emperors, but the exact details still require me to recall them. Perhaps it was because of an injury from back then that caused me to lose my memories again and again as I repeatedly died and reawakened. The legend of Death's treasure trove in the Berserk Sea doesn't ring any bells. Perhaps I'll be able to sense something and be naturally attracted to it when I travel to the southern continent by boat and pass through that sea. The experiences of the owner of that copper whistle resemble that of an undying's ritual, but there are also clear differences. I can sense evil auras and the premonition of danger. I believe the owner of the copper whistle is in a strange and terrifying state. It's best that you don't blow that copper whistle and summon the messenger. This will bring extreme danger. We can make further attempts when I fully recover my memories and figure out what that experience really means. The feather left behind by the copper whistle's owner that you mentioned can be used in the domain of the undead. It's a unique material that's rich in spirituality. When I recall more, I'll organize the knowledge of some rituals and charms you can use with it for you. Speaking of this matter, I recall that you'd asked me about the method for ridding the mental corruption of a Beyonder characteristic. This will likely need more time. At the very least, I'm still a blank slate in this aspect. Also, I vaguely remember that in the southern continent, there are strange creatures called feathermen. It's best to seal that card, otherwise, it might attract powerful enemies and many disasters. I can give you some techniques. This isn't too difficult. First, an improved wall of spirituality. As expected, the card of blasphemy has a convergence effect upon activation. It's a good thing that I've left it above the gray fog in the past. According to Mr. Azek's descriptions, he shouldn't be an amnesiac death. Otherwise, he wouldn't have looked up to the Blood Emperor and the Dark Emperor. It's likely that he's a son of death, participating in the War of the Four Emperors by accompanying that deity. Unfortunately, he suffered from severe injuries. As he thought, Klein produced a flame and burned the letter. Then, he tried the sealing technique and practiced what Azek had taught him in the letter. After doing all of this, he held a ritual and brought the Dark Emperor card and the Numinous Episcopate's copper whistle into the mysterious space above the grey fog, eliminating all possibilities of any accidents. There was no doubt that Klein had no wish to suddenly meet the King of the Five Seas, mast, at sea. Early in the morning, the sun rose above the horizon and dyed it golden. Klein went to the not-so-well-stocked second-class buffet cafeteria and ate 2 slices of toast with bacon and butter and drank a cup of lemon tea. After filling his stomach, he went to the deck to breathe in the fresh air and enjoy the beautiful early morning scenery. Then, he saw a drunk Captain Eland returning, his straight sword swaying. Thinking back to last night's incident, Klein came over and said without a smile, "Good morning. White Shark didn't cause you any trouble, right? He should be able to determine that I'm a passenger of the White Agate." Dressed in a dark red coat, Eland took off his ship-shaped hat and laughed. "This is his own problem. Actually, he wanted you to pay half the repair fees for the bar counter, but that isn't much. It's just a few soldi. I happened to win £6 last night and gave him some extra tips, and that was the end of it. Captain, are you afraid that a crazy adventurer like me will blow the whole thing up just for the sake of face, so you ended up choosing to bear the compensation?" Klein was silent for a few seconds. "I understand." Then, he turned and walked back to the bow, leaving 2 soft words, "Thank you." When Klein returned to his original position, he felt the sea breeze blowing against his face. He slowly let out a breath, feeling that it was too goddamn hard to force a persona. After enjoying the wind for a while, he was about to return to the cabin when 2 figures suddenly appeared beside him. They were Donna and Denton. Cecile, who was in charge of protecting them, was a few paces away. Donna had obviously not slept well last night. Her eyes were puffy, and her face was gloomy, but she was in high spirits. She was obviously imitating Klein's taking in of the scenery, but her eyes were darting around nimbly. Just as Denton, who was in a similar state as her, wanted to speak, she spoke first. "Uncle, who was that last night?" As she spoke, she looked ahead without turning her head, but her body was trembling slightly, as though she was recalling the scene she had seen. "It was a messenger. You can think of him as a postman." Klein also didn't look at the 2 little kids, as though he was talking about what he had for breakfast. "Messenger?" Denton almost lost control of the volume of his voice. "The world is so huge, so there's bound to be some strange creatures in this world. Trust me, although this creature looks very ferocious and terrifying, it's actually very gentle and professional. It just sent me a letter on behalf of a friend who's far away," Klein explained slightly, trying to describe the 4-meter-tall messenger as pitiful, weak, and helpless. After a night of panic, and because she hadn't been harmed in any way, Donna was much calmer. Her eyes lit up as she said, "Well, that's amazing. It's like listening to a story. Very cool." Denton also expressed his opinion. Then, he puzzledly asked, "But why didn't anyone else see it?" No one had any response. "That's because your hearts are pure." Klein smiled. This was a white lie. After all, he couldn't just say that it was a problem with the special cured meat. That would only make the 2 curious little fellows fail to resist making attempts. This way, ignoring the fact that ingesting large amounts of it would cause one to fall ill, just randomly having spirit vision activated was a very dangerous matter. Even though Klein could now sustain the consumption of his spirit vision for a long period of time, he ultimately didn't dare keep it open. Sometimes, seeing things he shouldn't have seen could lead to madness or death. "See, can we have a messenger of our own?" Donna asked, curious and excited. "That will depend on luck," Klein answered simply and calmly. He couldn't help but lampoon inwardly, "I don't even have a messenger of my own." In order to obtain a messenger, he had to design an accurate summoning ritual and prepare the corresponding spirit world creature contract. This was a specialized field of knowledge, and randomly doing so could easily summon something bad, so Klein didn't dare to recklessly try it. Yeah. Donna looked forward to it. Then, she said in a tiny voice, "Uncle, we'll keep this a secret for you." Beside her, Denton nodded solemnly. At this moment, a new passenger that intended to board in Demir Harbor carried his suitcase as he walked onto the deck. After sending the telegram, Blazing Danitz considered that the captain might instruct him on certain matters. So he decided to cut the holiday short and await orders at the capital of the Rörsted archipelago. Through his own channels, he had obtained a ticket, put on a wig, blackened his eyebrows, and easily boarded the White Agate, waiting for the liner to blow its whistle. Sigh, as Emperor Roselle said, capable people always have to do a little bit more work. As Danitz walked towards the cabin, he looked around leisurely. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. It was a young adventurer in a black coat, gentle in appearance and mad in nature. He was standing at the bow of the ship, beaming at him like a gentleman. The muscles in Danitz's face began to stiffen. Chapter 503, Hostage Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios discovering a pirate who was worth £3,000 board the ship in disguise. Klein immediately felt wary. He smiled to Denton and Donna who were beside him and said, "I've got a friend." He calmly walked towards the Rear Admiral Iceberg's fourth bosun, locking his eyes on the other party. The smile on Blazing Danitz froze when he saw the young adventurer, with crazy blood flowing through his veins, slowly approach. He suddenly had a thought: run. Run as fast as you can. Do your best to escape. Even if I have to use beyonder powers and expose my identity, I have to flee immediately. In his eyes, the reserved and stern adventurer was a genuine monster draped in human skin. Just as Danitz was about to make his move, he suddenly calmed down because he remembered what happened last night. The adventurer hadn't attacked him and had allowed him to leave. That is to say, he doesn't necessarily have the hostile intention of hunting me down. He can be reasoned with to resolve this crisis. Directly running away would only lead to conflict. Thoughts ran through Blazing Danitz's mind. Relying on his rich experience, he forcefully controlled his legs and appeared to wait in place. Klein walked over, one step at a time, and smiled. "Good morning, we meet again." That gentle and courteous smile of his made Danitz shudder for some inexplicable reason. He pursed his lips and said, "Good morning." Klein maintained his persona, his expression turning cold. "What are you doing on the ship?" Heading to the Rörsted archipelago, Blazing Danitz, who was also considered a famous pirate, answered honestly. "Why are you heading there?" Klein calmly asked. Danitz forced a smile and said, "Waiting for our captain's orders. Perhaps there will be a mission arranged for me. He's probably going to chase me off the ship. In any case, there's a potential risk to have a pirate board a ship." After he finished speaking, Danitz speculated about the possible developments. For him, this was considered a pretty good result. At most, he would waste a ticket. Klein fell silent, so silent that Danitz's hair stood on end. It was a full 5 or 6 seconds before he spoke again. "Which cabin do you live in?" "First class, room 312. Danitz raised the ticket in his hand to eye level. He didn't dare to look down for fear that the enemy would seize the opportunity to launch a surprise attack. Klein nodded indiscernibly. "Is there a servant room?" "Yes," Blazing Danitz subconsciously answered, but his heart was at a loss. He had no idea why the man was posing such a question at him. Then, he heard the man say to him in a flat tone like he was speaking to a subordinate, "You'll sleep there." "Ah. Where?" "I'll be sleeping in the servants' room." "Aren't you going to chase me off the ship?" Danitz was somewhat stunned as he blurted out, "Why?" Klein glanced at him and said one word in a faint voice, "Hostage." "Hostage?" "He's worried that I'm a planted agent on the ship, making it easier for the pirate fleet to plunder the White Agate, so he plans to use me as a hostage." "That's reasonable. If it really is as he suspects, then it wouldn't stop the pirate fleet's attack even if I'm chased off the ship. It's better to hold me hostage to aid in the negotiations. Dogsh*T. I hate this kind of arrogant, cold person who doesn't say much. They always only say a word or two, or even just an utterance, leaving me to guess the rest. If I'm really not his match, then I wouldn't even mix with such company. Why did I previously think that his temper matched my tastes? I must have been mad. Danitz gritted his teeth as he thought. Fine. He exhaled helplessly. To your cabin. Klein maintained the perfect German Sparrow persona. Phew. Blazing Danitz carried his suitcase, reluctantly leading the monster draped in human skin to the cabin. They went to the upper deck and arrived at room 312. After opening the door, Klein took a quick look and found the place several times better than second class. The living room was about 30 square meters and was connected to a master bedroom and 3 servant rooms. It had a separate bathroom, a standard wardrobe, and a mahogany desk. Danitz put down his suitcase and glanced at the servant rooms. He suddenly thought of an important question. Is the master bedroom going to be left empty just like that? The moment he finished speaking, he already knew the answer. It's mine. Klein smiled in a gentlemanlike fashion. As expected, to watch over me. Danitz felt depressed. Klein paced on the carpet in the room and said while pointing to the door, "Come with me downstairs." All right. Danitz was a little lost, unsure what the man was up to. The adventurer and famous pirate duo soon arrived at the second-class cabins and found Klein's original room. After opening the door, Klein didn't enter. He pointed inside and said to Danitz, "Tidy the things on the desk and put them in the suitcase." What? Tidy things? You want me to help tidy things up? Danitz was almost stunned. In a blink of an eye, he felt a surge of anger rush to the top of his head. How can I, Blazing Danitz, Rear Admiral Iceberg's fourth bosun, a famous pirate with a bounty of 3,000 pounds, be driven like a servant? My dignity and my reputation won't allow me to accept such humiliation. Klein gave him a cold look when he saw that Blazing Danitz was standing motionless like a petrified statue. Danitz's body suddenly trembled. He took a deep breath and replied with a smile which looked worse than crying, "All right." Aggrieved, he bent over and entered the cabin that didn't have a very high ceiling, swiftly putting the items that were scattered outside into the suitcase. Without needing Klein to remind him, he placed the things in order, even more carefully than how he dealt with his own luggage. After doing all this, he carried the suitcase and followed Klein upstairs. Along the way, he always had the impulse to sneak attack the man's back, but in the end, he held back. After returning to room 312, Danitz clenched his teeth, swallowed his saliva, and said, "How should I address you?" "German Sparrow," Klein responded succinctly. "German Sparrow." Danitz ruminated over the name inwardly, swearing that he would definitely not forget what had happened today. He vowed to let the man before him have a taste of something similar in the future. "Captain will definitely help me," he thought with anticipation. For the sake of his persona, Klein didn't choose the reclining chair. Instead, he randomly chose a hard wooden chair to sit down on. He leaned back in his chair, his body slightly hunched as he clasped his hands together, and said to Blazing Danitz, "Tell me about the famous pirates you know of." "There are a lot of them," Danitz replied, feeling somewhat stumped. He stood where he was, afraid to move, like a servant. Klein slowly curled his lips up and said, "Do it in accordance with the bounties." With that, he pointed to the chair opposite him. "Have a seat." With a sigh of relief, Danitz hurriedly sat down. He suddenly felt that the man wasn't too bad, he was at least willing to give him a seat. Woo! The white agate sailed out into the open sea and moved at a speed of 13 knots until noon. Blazing Danitz, whose mouth was going dry from all the talk, was finally permitted to stop. He took his ticket and led Klein to the first-class dining restaurant. The restaurant was decorated elegantly, with violinists playing in the corner and barriers separating the tables to ensure the privacy of one's dining environment. After walking a few steps, Klein met Donna's family in Cleves. They occupied a large table and were waiting for the waiter to serve the dishes. Uncle Sparrow. Because of their shared secret, the little boy, Denton, had changed the way he addressed him. Donna blinked, fully expressing her doubts. She clearly remembered that Uncle Sparrow lived in a second-class cabin and wasn't supposed to be in this restaurant. Klein waved his hand with a smile as a greeting, then he pointed at Danitz and said, "He's treating." "Is that so?" Donna sized up Danitz curiously, and they felt that the gentleman looked odd, especially his eyebrows which looked extremely unnatural. Cleves put down his fork and knife, and, after 2 seconds of silence, he asked, "Your friend?" Klein chuckled and turned his head to Danitz. "What do you think the answer should be?" Danitz gritted his teeth, then he forced a smile. "Gehrman once saved me." "Yes, that's right. Otherwise, I might have already been killed by him for the sake of claiming the bounty." Danitz consoled himself. Cleves looked Danitz up and down a few times and said nothing more. Passing the Donna family, Klein found a table by the window. The waiter came with great enthusiasm and handed over the menu. Charcoal steak, red wine foie gras, vegetable salad. Danitz scanned the menu and couldn't help but sigh. Ships that dock for resupplying every 2 to 3 days are better. There's plenty of fresh food. When you encounter a ship that floats on the sea for 1 to 2 weeks, you can only cycle between beer, cured meat, and various canned goods. It's so monotonous that it drives you crazy. However, the sea itself will also provide fresh food. Heh, but this requires one to have sufficient judgment. We had a sailor on our ship who once had a beautiful lobster, only to suffer diarrhea until his ass nearly. As a pirate, he had the habit of using vulgar language for descriptions, but after he looked at Gehrman Sparrow's expression, he changed his vocabulary. Suffer diarrhea until his ass nearly fell off. I have reason to suspect that there were other factors. Although your captain is a woman, there should be very few women in the crew. Furthermore, with the sailors unable to get ashore for a long period of time, they must be thirsty. Klein silently lampooned, took the menu, and drew a line according to the price. All of these. All right. The waiter's expression didn't change at all. At that moment, Klein saw Captain Eland enter the dining room and pass by, so he simply greeted him. When he looked back, he saw that blazing Danitz was already looking out the window, as if he was watching the scenery. "The captain knows you?" Klein asked in a tone close to a statement. Danitz let out a hollow chuckle. "We fought his crew back when he was the bosun of the Wilhelm V, besides, I'm also considered quite a famous pirate." At this point, Danitz recalled his current situation and suddenly became depressed. Hence, he changed the topic. "I've always wondered why just Eland would suddenly quit the Navy." By then, he was already an arbiter. Chapter 504, Red Skull Pirate Crew Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. A Beyonder was allowed to leave the fleet. Without Danitz's deliberate explanation, Klein easily understood why he found it strange. In a Nighthawks team, even the civilian staff would experience strict restrictions. Even a normal resignation would require them to sign a lifelong confidentiality agreement. They weren't allowed to leave the Nighthawks team's area that they originally belonged to, and once they were approved to move to another city, they had to immediately register at the local Evernight church. From such rules, it could be seen how the officials treated Beyonder's powers and related matters. A Beyonder who had drunk a potion wouldn't be able to leave their organization so easily. Klein clearly remembered that Miss Justice initially had the means and channels to become a Beyonder, but she didn't attempt them. The reason given was that she didn't want to lose her freedom. Similar thoughts ran through his mind, but they didn't become words, because the polite but cold Gehrman Sparrow wouldn't be interested in such rumors. So what? Klein looked at the tableware on the table and calmly asked. "Do you know how to make conversation?" Blazing Danitz secretly drew a breath and squeezed out a smile. I just found it strange. We all suspected that he had joined MI9, and that he was using his identity as a captain to monitor the sea routes. It's possible. Klein picked up a glass of water and took a sip. The dishes he ordered were served one by one according to their type. The restaurant even gave him 2 complimentary cups of sweet, bubbling, and light gold pre-meal wine. Klein stopped talking and concentrated on enjoying the food, feeling that it was indeed much better than the second-class dining room. The melodious tunes of a violin resonated amidst the sounds produced from the slight contact between the cutlery and plates. The blue and open sea outside the window rippled quietly, and everything seemed perfect. As Klein was about to be served dessert, a crewman came stomping in and ran to the table where Eland was sitting. "Captain, there's a pirate ship." He didn't suppress his voice. Most of the passengers were shocked and stopped eating. Klein looked up, looking across him at Danitz with his eyes dark and cold. Blazing Danitz stiffened for a second, then he smiled bitterly. He lowered his voice and said, "If I were to say that this has nothing to do with me, will you believe me?" Klein's eyelids twitched as he slowly smiled. "Guess. Guess. You son of a B***tch. Danitz was so furious that he almost cursed. He maintained his smile and said, "Your wisdom is enough to judge everything." At that moment, Eland quickly asked about the situation. He stood up and said to the panicking first-class passengers, "There's only one pirate ship. We have enough power to deal with it. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your rooms in an orderly manner and await the arrival of good news. Believe me, the damage caused by chaos far exceeds whatever damage those pirates can do. I don't wish to hear rumors in the future that although we, the White Agate, had succeeded in repelling the pirates, a handful of passengers had fallen and injured themselves." Under his arrangements, and with the support of the crew, Donna and the others left the dining room and returned to their own cabins, which included Klein and Blazing Danitz. "I thought you were going to temporarily take over the White Agate and try to keep it safe from harm," Danitz commented inside room 312 as he closed the door, as though he was watching a play. To be able to immediately throw out an olive branch and talk about creeds and remuneration after finding a suitable candidate showed that he was an extroverted bosun who liked to talk with others. Klein glanced at him, then went to the window, and looked out. He saw a large ship with a red skull flag fluttering as it cruised towards them. There were chimneys and sails. Know them? Klein held his hands in his pocket and stood behind a thick glass window. Danitz walked to a spot diagonally behind him. After looking into the distance for 2 seconds, he said, "Red Skull. A small medium band of pirates. The captain is C. Wolfe Johnson with a bounty of £900. The first mate is One-Eyed Anderson with a bounty of £500. In the pirate world, a bounty was an important reference point that determined one's status and standing. Considering that he didn't have the ability to move underwater adeptly, it would be easy to have innocents die if he allowed the pirates to board the ship." Klein was silent for a few seconds before asking, "Do they know you?" "Of course." Danitz instantly straightened his back. "They're qualified to participate in distinguished gatherings between pirates. I once kicked them in the ass. As expected of a famous pirate worth £3,000. Klein's asked without a change in expression, "Do they have binoculars?" "That's an essential item. Even if a ship is placed under control, there will be sailors standing on the observation deck, using binoculars to observe the surroundings to prevent any surprise attacks," Danitz replied scornfully. He could finally tell that this dangerous fellow was a new adventurer, and it was very likely that this was his first time at sea. Was he a famous bounty hunter? A member of a secret organization? Danitz subconsciously guessed Gehrman Sparrow's past. During such times, will the captain and the first mate use their binoculars to observe us? Klein originally wanted to address them as £900 and £500, but he found it a bit impolite. "Definitely, they have to keep track of their target," Danitz replied, slightly puzzled. He didn't understand Gehrman Sparrow's goal for asking such questions. From his point of view, if he had his powerful strength, he definitely would have allowed the Red Skull pirates to approach, find an opportunity to board their ship, and then eliminate everyone. Klein tilted his head and looked at Danitz before revealing a gentlemanly and warm smile. That's good. What do you want to do? Don't smile like that. Danitz suddenly panicked and summoned the courage to fight back. Take off your wig, Klein calmly ordered. Ah. Danitz was puzzled as he slowly removed the wig from his head. Klein took out a special bottle of extract from his secret pocket and handed it over. Wipe your eyebrows and face clean. This was a mystical, makeup removal extract he had prepared before advancing to Faceless. He had used it when attacking the Wraith from the Rose School of Thought. Although Klein no longer needed it anymore, he had been reluctant to throw it away. Danitz was even more confused. However, he was unwilling to throw himself into an irreversible situation unless he was really attacked, physically. He had no choice but to do as he was told, removing the disguise on his face and restoring his original appearance. Putting away the small metal bottle, Klein opened the window and let the sea breeze pour in. Stand here and look outside, he pointed directly behind the window and said to blazing Danitz. Danitz warily walked over in a daze and stood firmly behind the window. Klein observed for a few seconds, then he calmly said, You have two choices. 1. Crawl out and hang there in an eye-catching manner. 2. You get held by the collar by me and hung there in an eye-catching manner. What do you want to do? Danitz blurted out. Klein revealed his amiable smile again. Show you to the pirates. I believe Rear Admiral Iceberg's fourth bosun holds sufficient weight to persuade them to retreat. No, don't do that. Danitz subconsciously rejected the notion. He could imagine what the people from the Red Skull pirate crew would think when they discovered him. Either Blazing Danitz had been captured, and there was a very terrifying powerhouse on the ship, or the ship was already being targeted by Rear Admiral Iceberg, and that other pirates were to immediately keep their distance. And the way I'm hung up decides which thought they would have. Danitz thought sadly. Klein smiled even more genially. I'm a very easy person to get along with, really, as long as you do as I tell you. At this moment, Danitz once again felt the indescribable sense of hunger. He felt as if his flesh and soul could be torn from his body at any moment. After weighing the pros and cons for a second, he half raised his hands, gritted his teeth, and smiled. I'll do it myself. Holding back his anger and grievances, Danitz turned and climbed out of the window. Using his balance and strength from years of experience, he hung himself off the cabin with his forearm. Don't try to escape. I'm not a patient man. Klein's face turned cold as he gently reminded. Phew. Danitz resisted the urge to release his forearm and jump straight down. On the pirate ship in the distance, the crew responsible for observing the white agate sent a message to Sea Wolf Johnson. Boss, there's a weird guy hanging out the window over there. Johnson was stunned for a second. He raised his binoculars and placed it in front of his eyes. He quickly discovered the strange fellow who his subordinate was talking about. The man's position was simply too eye-catching. Isn't that Blazing Danitz? Johnson's brows twitched as he recognized the man. How did he get on the white agate? What's the meaning of him hanging outside? This is Rear Admiral Iceberg's prey. After a series of questions, Sea Wolf came to a conclusion. He raised his right hand and said, Everyone take note, stay far away from this area immediately. In room 305, Clevy stood by the window with the revolver gripped tightly in his hand as a precaution against the potential sea skirmish. Donna's family was a little frightened. They didn't return to their respective bedrooms, but they instead sat in the living room, waiting for the bombardment to begin. Cecile and the other bodyguard, Teague, stood guard beside them, fully alert. At this moment, a look of confusion appeared in Clevy's slightly aged eyes. After a few minutes, he took a step back, lowered his muzzle, and said to the people, The pirates have left. What? This development left Ertie Branch and the others surprised and confused. They had no idea what the pirates were thinking. Room 312. Blazing Danitz crawled back and couldn't help but give a snort. "You're borrowing my captain's reputation. She really hates these kinds of things. Just wait for Rear Admiral Iceberg to teach you a lesson." Danitz thought angrily. Klein quietly listened and asked, "I remember her reward in loan was 26,000 pounds. This madman." Danitz couldn't find the words to respond. Chapter 505, A Servant Worth 3,000 Pounds. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Captain, the Red Skull pirates have fled. A sailor rushed into the captain's quarters. They fled. Eland lifted his telescope and looked quizzically at the calm sea, just in time to see the Red Skull disappear into the horizon. He frowned, completely unable to understand how such a development could have occurred. From his point of view, the White Agate's armaments definitely weren't capable of scaring off the Red Skull pirates. It was guaranteed that both parties would have to circle around each other dozens of times during the skirmish and fire multiple shots in order to ensure that the other party found them a tough nut to crack. Without daring to engage in a prolonged, they would then rationally choose to retreat. Could it be that the Red Skull was just passing by and had no intention of plundering us? However, if they weren't here to plunder, why would they enter this sea route? This is the easiest place to be stopped by the naval fleet and the church's ships. Even the 4 kings and 7 admirals would still try their best to keep a low profile when they pass by the surrounding seas. Eland was filled with doubts, and he felt that things weren't that simple. Being careful keeps one away from disaster. I mustn't be carelessness. Eland put away his yellow-brown telescope and paced back and forth. He half raised his hand and said to the navigator, "We shall dock at Bansi Harbor tonight. Report our encounter with the pirates to the Navy and the Church." According to their usual plan, the next stop for the White Agate would be the Tiana port, and it would probably take 3 days at 13 knots to reach it. From Tiana port, it would finally reach the capital of the Rorstad archipelago, the city of generosity, Byam. And there was a faster way to sail from Pritz Harbor to Byam, which was to stop only once in the middle of the voyage, at Bansi Harbor, about 120 nautical miles from Demir Harbor. The Red Skull really left. Donna's father, Bertie Branch, walked to the window and looked out into the distance. Cleves calmly nodded and said, "Yes." Just as he finished his sentence, a sailor's shout sounded from outside. "The danger has been averted. The danger has been averted." Upon receiving official confirmation, Donna and Denton finally relaxed and had the courage to approach the window and look outside. Are the Red Skull pirates that powerful? Donna's eyes widened as she searched for a ship that had already gone far away. "Very powerful." Cleves gave his answer. "How powerful are they?" Denton immediately pressed. On the other side, the bodyguard, Teague, straightened his hair and chuckled. "Even if we don't include the cannons and hundreds of pirates on the ship, just Captain Johnson and the first mate Anderson are extremely powerful on their own. Anderson's nickname is One-Eyed. The bounty reward for him in the kingdom is 500 pounds. All of us in this room added together with the help of a few sailors, might be able to defeat him in battle. As for Johnson, who's nicknamed Sea Wolf, he can easily finish such an opponent. If he were to board the ship, no one would be able to stop him. His bounty is worth 900 pounds, nearly 1,000 pounds. Is that a lot?" Donna was surprised at the potency of Sea Wolf and One-Eyed, as well as their bounty. In her memory, her father earned a total of 1,500 a year. A lot. This is a reward that they or their heads could directly be exchanged for. The items they have on them and the things they've plundered will also belong to you. The kingdom will buy it at the market price, and you will still have the chance to obtain the bounties from other countries, Cecile explained. On the sea, pirates with a bounty of more than 300 pounds are rather powerful. For those who are close to or above 1,000 pounds, they'll be rather famous in the sea they plow. And I mean vast sea expanses like the Sonia Sea or the Fog Sea. Therefore, the 4 kings and 7 admirals are considered famous throughout the 5 seas. Donna innocently asked. Cleves replied seriously, yes. In that case, are the Red Skull pirates very famous in the entire Sonia Sea? Donna asked with concise logic. Yes. Teague nodded. But why did they flee? Donna blinked. It might not have been them fleeing, Cecile didn't know the reason either. Cleves looked out the window again as he knitted his brows. Maybe there's another reason. Maybe they had no plans to plunder us at all. They just came across us. Other reasons? Donna suddenly had a guess. Could it be Uncle Sparrow's Talaz house, gentle messenger that scared them away? Yeah, it's really scary. Donna's mind bubbled like boiling water. She turned her head excitedly and looked down to realize her brother's eyes were shining as well. The two of them pursed their lips and immediately realized that their thoughts were the same. Let's go out and get some air on this level. Donna found a reason to drag her brother out of room 305. Outside, Denton said in a suppressed voice, "Are we going to find Uncle Sparrow?" Exactly. Donna smiled with a spirited look. I saw him enter room 312. Inside room 312. Blazing Danitz, who no longer mentioned Rear Admiral Iceberg, looked at the Red Skull which had turned its bow around and sked with laughter. They must have been frightened by the declaration of the Navy's cannons and the news that a pirate crew had been destroyed recently. They actually took the risk of raiding this sea route in order to earn enough money before leaving the sea. Heh, so what if there are giant ship cannons? The Navy and the Church have a lot of powerful things, and they've always existed. But never have they made it impossible for us to continue being pirates. We can't beat them head-on, but we can always escape, right? They can't possibly stay with the merchant ships forever, can they? I know, the ironclad warship is getting bigger and bigger, and the steam engine installed in it will also become stronger. One day, the speed will break through 18 knots, 20 knots, and once they're on your tail, one can only wait to be caught. However, the sea is so vast. Tens of thousands of ships can't even fill a corner even if they were all thrown there. There are also a lot of unexplored areas at sea. One can hide in those places after doing something. Although it's dangerous, there are still opportunities. This fellow is indeed the talkative type. Don't you think that a crazy adventurer wouldn't care about these things? Klein looked away and scanned the room. His gaze finally fell on his leather suitcase. He then raised his chin and said, "Wash the dirty clothes inside." The expression on the garrulous Danitz's face froze. He yearned to burn the entire ship down. He felt that his anger was like gushing steam that had lifted the gate of reason. Danitz opened his mouth and took a breath before repeating it again. His flushed face softened as he asked without a smile on his face, "Is that all?" "Only the dirty ones. The coat just needs to be brushed." Klein was almost amused by the man's show of anger, and he felt that this was what Danitz deserved from robbing the innocent. The clothes in his suitcase were the ones he changed out of last night after a shower. As he felt a little lazy, he had only washed his underwear. "Calm down, don't lose control. Calm down, don't lose control." After admonishing himself several times, Danitz walked over to Gehrman Sparrow's suitcase, opened it, and took out the clothes that needed cleaning. Just as he was getting busy in the bathroom, he heard the doorbell jingle. Klein opened the door to find Donna and Denton. "Uncle Sparrow, I hope I didn't disturb you." Donna's eyes darted left and right. "No." Klein stepped aside. The two little fellows entered the room and were surprised to see Danitz doing the laundry. "Where are the servants?" Denton asked subconsciously. "Didn't bring them along," Klein answered for Danitz. Donna asked, in apparent confusion, "But there are laundry maids attached to first-class cabins. They're charged by the barrel." Before she could finish, Danitz froze. He had been so angry that he had forgotten about it. Danitz shook the water from his hand, turned, and forced a smile at Gehrman Sparrow. "Can I hire the laundry maid for help?" Klein didn't insist on seeing the pirate make a fool of himself, so he smiled and said, "I only care about the results." Phew. Danitz heaved a sigh of relief. Their back and forth question and answer exchange made Donna realize that something was wrong. The young lady asked in suspicion, "Uncle Sparrow, aren't you two friends? Why does he look different from before?" Klein found a chair and sat down. Without hiding anything, he calmly said, "To be exact, he's my prisoner of war." Prisoner of war? Denton looked around in a daze, not remembering when the two uncles had a conflict. At first, Donna was puzzled, but then her heart skipped a beat. She cheerfully asked, is he a pirate?" "Yeah." Klein nodded gently. "The Red Skull pirates were also scared off by you, Uncle Sparrow?" Donna pressed in excitement. Klein shot a glance at Danitz and replied without an expression, "In a way." Having all her questions answered, Donna felt abnormally pleased. She glanced at Danitz and unknowingly lowered her voice. "Uncle Sparrow, does he have a name?" "No." "Does he have a bounty on him?" "No." "I mustn't let anyone know of what happened to me." Danitz opened his mouth in a bid to answer before Klein. "I'm Sieg." At this moment, Klein said with a fleeting voice, "Danitz." "Danitz." Donna and Denton looked at each other without asking any more questions. The siblings didn't stay long and soon took their leave. They kept feeling that the pirate's eyes were fierce. When they returned to room 305, they saw that her father and Uncle Clevis were still in the midst of their discussion. Donna deliberately interjected innocently with a question. "A lot of people were talking about pirates just now. Someone mentioned Danitz. Is he very powerful?" "Danitz. Blazing Danitz. He's Rear Admiral Iceberg's subordinate, the fourth bosun of the Golden Dream," Clevis answered simply. Upon saying this, he suddenly turned silent as he retracted his gaze, seemingly in recall. "A pirate admiral's subordinate." Donna pressed out of curiously, "How much is his bounty?" Clevis returned to normal and said in a deep voice, £3,000. £3,000? Donna and Denton opened their mouths, little by little, almost forgetting to close them. "The captain of the Red Skull Pirates only has a bounty of £900, but the man who looks like a servant is worth £3,000. The siblings looked at each other, unable to utter a single word. At 6 p.m., the White Agate entered a harbor again. Bansi Harbor. Eland is very cautious. Danitz stood by the window, looking out at the darkened harbor and the tall lighthouse. Without waiting for Klein's response, he laughed and said, "It seems like there are some nasty legends here." Chapter 506, The Weather Museum Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Klein already had a basic understanding of Danitz's character, so he didn't take the initiative to ask about the legends. He continued sitting in his chair and calmly looked at him. Danitz, who hadn't been interrupted, shook his head. Legend has it that 300 years ago when the Lone Army first occupied this island, more than 500 soldiers mysteriously disappeared after a fog. Not long after that, a lot of bones appeared by the beach and on the mountain, and similar incidents happened several times. This continued until the Church of Storms built a cathedral here and sent a bishop. Although historians accredited the official start of the colonial era to when Roselle sent a fleet to find a safe route to the southern continent, in reality, for a long period of time before that, the countries of the northern continent had explored the surrounding seas and gradually colonized a few islands. The only difference was that these operations weren't systematic or wide-scale enough. Disappearing mysterious in the fog. Bones appearing by the beach and on the mountains. Klein thought of the forsaken land of the gods for some baffling reason. According to Little Sun's description, there was no sun there, with only lightning in the night. Furthermore, when humans were surrounded by darkness without a sliver of light, they would encounter strange or terrifying events. Looking at the lighthouse that stood out in the setting sun, Danitz continued, and according to the tombs and murals excavated on the island, the natives here seem to have a tradition of cannibalism. This island experiences intense weather changes, making it often encounter earthquakes, storms, and heavy fog. Thus, the natives experience disasters time and time again. In order to survive, they began worshipping a god of weather they created for themselves. Every year, they would hold 4 rituals. The rituals involve killing chosen worshippers as they shared in the blood and flesh before burying the worshippers' heads in the sacrificial altar. However, a similar tradition has long since been replaced by the storm sacrificial ritual, and the original language of the natives has also disappeared. God of Weather. A conquered island that had once retained the tradition of live sacrifices. Klein made his preliminary judgment. Danitz retracted his gaze and casually said, because of these legends, there are 2 unique customs in Bansi Harbor. One is to close the door tightly on nights with heavy fog or huge changes in weather. They don't head out or respond to any knocking. The other is that they love the blood of all kinds of animals and have learned from migrating elves to add salt, solidifying the blood into strange lumps which are tender and fragrant when matched with the acrid condiments native to this land. Isn't that blood cake? Klein was stunned for a second, his eyebrows furrowing in puzzlement. Elves? According to the stereotypes he had formed in his previous life, elves were supposed to be elegant vegetarians. How could they research the correct method for eating blood, as well as the 100 methods involved in making blood cakes? That's right. Rumor has it that many elves like solidified blood. Danitz spread out his hands in response. Unfortunately, it's already very difficult to find such creatures who have good culinary skills. Little Sun previously mentioned that the ancient god of the elves, Elf King, Sanayathrim, wielded the authority of the storm. In that case, the elves should be a race equivalent to Beyonders of the Sailor Pathway. So it's not inconceivable that elves enjoy blood-related food. Perhaps, they even possess the attribute of being irritable as well. That's quite a scene to behold. Klein's thoughts raced, and he gradually turned his attention to blood cakes. It's been a while since I ate that. He suddenly had the urge to alight from the ship and taste the delicacy. At this moment, Danitz took the initiative to suggest. There's a green lemon restaurant here that's very famous. Pig blood is especially delicious. Do you want to try it out? He kept having the feeling that being alone in the same room with Gehrman Sparrow was very dangerous. He was worried that this monster in human skin would suddenly go crazy. He should be more restrained in places with more people. Holy Lord of Storms, I hope this trip comes to an end as soon as possible. Danitz prayed without confidence. As a pirate, he also believed in the Lord of Storms, but he didn't have enough respect for the church. After hearing Blazing's suggestion, Klein, who already had such intentions, was immediately moved. However, the legends and customs Danitz had told him of made him feel a little uncomfortable. Thus, he took out a gold coin and performed a divination rite in front of Danitz. The result was that there were no dormant dangers in Bansi Harbor for him. Klein looked at the gold coin in his hand without moving his eyes away for a few seconds. He still felt uneasy. As Danitz watched this scene, he suddenly understood that this monster in front of him was skilled in divination. Even if I were to secretly flee, it would still be very easy for him to find me. Blazing felt a wave of depression as a faint sadness welled up in his heart. He had just recovered from his disconsolate mood when Klein suddenly stood up and walked over to the washroom. Before closing the door, Klein expressionlessly turned his head around and said, "You can use this opportunity to escape." With that, Klein slammed the washroom's door. Danitz spread his hands open and clenched them tightly, took 2 steps towards the door before coming to a halt. The unknown was the scariest. He didn't dare take the risk of creating conflict before he had any clear understanding of Gehrman Sparrow's Beyonder powers. At least he's kind enough to me and hasn't actually hurt me. He'll likely let me go when we get to Bayam. Danitz's hopes of him getting lucky had taken hold of his mind. In the washroom, Klein pulled out a paper figurine, disguised it, and took 4 steps counterclockwise to head above the grey fog. He sat down at the end of the long bronze table, removed the pendulum from his left wrist, and wrote the corresponding divination statement: "There is danger dormant in Bansi Harbor." He hung his spirit pendulum and adjusted his posture. After muttering a few times, Klein opened his eyes and saw the topaz pendant rotating clockwise. Furthermore, it was with a high amplitude and frequency. This meant that for Klein, there was a great danger lurking in Bansi Harbor. How could this be? This place was colonized by the kingdom for more than 300 years, and it has become an important port on the main trading route for over 100 years. There have never been any rumors of danger being spread. Could it be that several powerful pirates are cooperating to sack this port? No, those cannons defending the port aren't for show. Klein frowned, performing another divination on whether he would encounter any pirate-related mishaps, but the answer was no. He fell silent for a few seconds, then he allowed his spirituality to envelop his body before plummeting through the grey fog. Returning to the real world, Klein pressed the mechanical button on the toilet, put away the paper figurine double, and went to the nearby washing basin to wet his hands with water. In this short period of time, he quickly sorted out his thoughts and decided to do his best to hide. His priority was to stay safe. Pulling out a tissue and wiping his hands, Klein opened the door and saw that Danitz was still standing in the middle of the living room. A pirate who's cautious to the point of being a little cowardly. In a sense, Rear Admiral Iceberg's subordinates are all adventurers who are part-time pirates. Klein looked at him and calmly said, "To the first-class dining room." "All right." Danitz didn't understand why Gehrman Sparrow had suddenly changed his mind, but in the end, he chose to not raise any disputes. Walking down the gangway, Cleves suddenly said to Donna and the others, "Head to the Green Lemon restaurant first. I have some matters to do with Captain Eland. I'll join you soon." "All right." Although Erdy Branch was surprised, he wasn't too puzzled. Cleves was halfway aboard the ship when he met Eland with his straight sword at his waist. "I'm going to visit Gehrman Sparrow." Cleves turned around for the first-class cabins after saying that. Eland was momentarily dazed, unable to understand his out-of-the-blue intentions. "There's no need to inform me that you're visiting Gehrman Sparrow." Eland was startled for 2 seconds before he vaguely grasped the true meaning behind Cleves's words. "He's telling me so that if anything happens to him, it would be because of his visit to Gehrman Sparrow. But if nothing happens to him, it means that his suspicions were incorrect and there's no need to further disturb Gehrman Sparrow any further." Eland stopped in his footsteps and said to the first mate beside him, "Wait 15 minutes. Thump. 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 Klein and Danitz, who were on their way out, heard a rhythmic knock on the door. Danitz, who received a signal, hurried over and opened the door. It was Cleves outside. He looked at Danitz, who had disguised himself again, before turning to Klein and said, "Blazing Danitz." At lunchtime, he had found Gehrman Sparrow's friend somewhat odd and familiar, but he hadn't connected the face to the picture on the bounty notice. It was only when Donna mentioned Danitz that the inspiration struck him, making him realize that the two were very similar. As expected. Klein was about to nod and answer when Danitz said with a laugh, "My friend, you have the wrong person. Although I look like the famous pirate who's worth 3,000 pounds, I'm really not him. People have always had misunderstandings, bringing me a great deal of trouble." Klein raised his hand and covered his mouth. He almost laughed out loud and destroyed his persona. He restrained his expression and calmly replied, "Yes. Sigh. My reputation." Danitz stretched his neck and looked at the ceiling. "What are the two of you planning?" Cleves drew in a silent breath and asked directly. Klein jerked his chin towards Danitz. "Watching over him." "Watching over?" Cleves couldn't understand Gehrman Sparrow's words. "Sir, you must learn to make associations by yourself. Learn to infer on your own. You can't have me explain in detail. That doesn't match my persona." Confronted with the doubtful look in Clevy's eyes, Klein casually said, "He boarded at Demir Harbor and I recognized him, so I decided to watch over him to prevent any accidents." After looking at Klein for a few seconds, Clevy's nodded his head and said, "Will you be fine? Do you need any help?" "No," Klein replied quietly. Clevy's glanced at the depressed Danitz and took a step back. "Then, I'll take my leave." Just as he was about to leave, he was suddenly stopped by Gehrman Sparrow. He heard the mysterious young adventurer say, with some solemnity, "Return to the ship as soon as possible. There is danger dormant in Bansi Harbor." In the Green Lemon restaurant, Donna had just laid out her napkin when she saw through the window that Uncle Clevy's had arrived hurriedly downstairs. At this moment, the weather in the port suddenly changed. Strong gales rose up from all directions, causing the trees to sway back and forth. As expected of Bansi Harbor, the Weather Museum, Donna studied the outside scenery with interest. She saw a man in a black cloak trudging through the wind with a lantern in his hand. Seemingly sensing that he was being watched, that person turned his body sideways and looked up at the second floor of the restaurant. Then, Donna discerned his appearance and saw that the area where the person's head was supposed to be was empty inside the black cloak. There was only a bare neck with bright red blood spewing out of it. The person slunk his body back down, pulled at his cloak before continuing forward. Chapter 507, Bansi Harbor in the Wind. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Donna jerked back, her pupils constricting, her mouth half open as her scream reached her lips. If she hadn't seen the messenger before, then she would have long lost control of herself and staggered to her feet in terror, unconcerned whether she would flip over the tables or chairs. Fortunately, she was no longer the young lady who was completely ignorant of the matters of the sea when she first boarded the White Agate. Her voice had only become slightly sharper as she pointed outside the window and stammered, "There's a zombie. A headless zombie." She used the most commonly seen zombie in folklore to describe the terrifying thing she had just seen. Cecile shot to her feet and rushed to Donna's side. She looked curiously out of the window where the raging wind was blowing and observed for a few seconds. "There's nothing," she said truthfully. Donna shrank back, mustered her courage, and cautiously leaned forward only to see the trees outside swaying, with random clutter flying everywhere. There wasn't a single pedestrian. There really was someone there. He was wearing a black cloak, and he had no head. His neck was bleeding. Donna said while gesturing in an attempt to convince the adults in the room. Her father, Erdy Branch, propped himself up from the table, went to the window, and looked out for a moment. "Donna, you aren't allowed to read that Font's Horror Stories anthology anymore tonight." But Donna felt aggrieved and wanted to defend herself. At this moment, Clevy's came up to the second floor and approached, asking, "What happened?" Donna said she saw a zombie, a headless zombie. The other bodyguard, Teague, explained with a chuckle. Clevy's was silent for 2 seconds, then he nodded at Donna. "It's okay, this shall pass. The wind outside is very strong and dangerous. We'll leave when things calm down." In the eyes of Donna, Uncle Clevy's words indicated that he believed her and had chosen the safest solution. But in the eyes of Erdy, Teague, and the others, this was merely a clumsy tactic to comfort a child. Seeing that Donna was still a little nervous and that his real employer wasn't too satisfied, Clevy's pulled out a chair and sat down as he calmly said, "There's a strange tradition in Bansi Harbor. They don't leave the buildings or respond to any knocks on the door when the weather turns stormy at night. If you open the door, will you be taken away by the zombie?" Denton suddenly asked in enlightenment, having seen the messenger with his sister. "You can think of it that way." Clevy's picked up a glass of water and took a sip. "So that's how it is." Donna calmed down, believing that she wouldn't encounter that horrible zombie as long as she didn't leave the restaurant. It was only then that she noticed that the surrounding customers had all cast their gazes over due to the commotion. Being stared at by so many people, Donna felt uncomfortable from head to toe. She instinctively wanted to lower her head to avoid everything. I didn't do anything wrong. I really saw it. Donna obstinately straightened her neck and looked around. She saw the gentlemen in tailcoats and the ladies in their beautiful dresses retract their gazes. She saw them lower their heads, pick up their spoons, and scoop the dark red blood blocks in their bowls to stuff into their mouths. Their lips were stained with a tinge of red. Their faces appeared pale under the light of the crystal chandelier. The contrast between the two made Donna feel an inexplicable sense of fear. She turned her head back and waited for dinner, secretly praying to the goddess that the gale would cease as soon as possible. Bansi Harbor Telegraph Office. As soon as Eland and his first mate finished sending their report to the Navy, they realized that the wind outside was howling and that the nearby doors and windows were rattling. Really, the weather here is always so unstable. Eland put on his boat-shaped hat and sighed with a laugh. His first mate, Harris, laughed out loud. Otherwise, how could they call themselves the Weather Museum? It's best if you don't head out. Legends say that you'll lose your head because of that. The telegraph office's staff, a young lady with curly brown hair, reminded them in a slow voice. I know, but I've tried a few times and nothing happened. Without a care, Harris opened the door to leave. Eland stopped him and thought for a moment. Will it be okay to go to the cathedral next door? Your telegraph office will be closing, right? No problem. The lady with the curly brown hair was still as slow as ever. Eland nodded, opened the telegraph office's door, and trudged toward the storm cathedral, dozens of meters away, against the gusts of wind that seemed to be capable of sweeping away a child. First Mate Harris, who was holding on to his hat, followed the captain as if to express his desire to rush directly back to the white agate. However, the moment he opened his mouth, strong gales gushed into his mouth and his whole voice was miserably stuffed back into his mouth. After croaking for a while, he wisely shut his mouth and stopped making obviously unrealistic proposals. It was still 15 minutes to 7, and even in the evening, the main doors of the Storm Cathedral were still open for its congregation. The gale weakened significantly when it reached the area. At the very least, Eland and Harris no longer had to worry about their hats abandoning them. Upon entering the cathedral, they walked down the dark and solemn aisle. They stepped into the prayer hall and saw a man in a dark blue priest robe sitting in the front pew. He was quietly gazing at the huge storm's sacred emblem, made up of the symbols of the wind, waves, and lightning, on the altar. Eland smiled as he moved closer, patting the familiar figure on the shoulder. Jace, where's your bishop? With that pat, the priest's head wobbled. Then, it fell forward, and with a loud thud, it fell to the ground, continuously rolling about. Blood gushed out of the priest's neck like a fountain, soaking Eland's face. A cold and damp feeling reached his heart, and Eland's eyes were blinded with a rich red color. All that was left in his line of sight was a world of blood, as well as a head that had finally stopped rolling and was staring upwards with a glazed look in its eyes. At 7:15 p.m. Klein and Danitz, who came out of the first-class restaurant, noticed that the wind which had been shaking the boat had calmed down considerably. After thinking for 2 seconds, Klein walked all the way to the entrance of the cabin and asked the crew, "Who else isn't back?" The crew member had seen this passenger enjoy the delicious murloc meat with the captain, so he didn't hide anything as he said, "Other than the Branch family and the Timothy family at the Green Lemon restaurant, all the other passengers have returned before the gale started." Heh, that place is quite far away, and it also takes quite a long time to dine there. Oh right, captain and first mate went to the telegraph office, but they haven't returned yet. Klein nodded indiscernibly and returned to room 312 in silence. He stood by the window, looking at the waves that were stirred by the wind. Even without using the mysterious space above the grey fog to divine, his own spiritual intuition made him vaguely sense that something bad was brewing and happening. After waiting another 5 minutes, he still didn't see Captain Eland and Donna's family return. Klein glanced sideways at Danitz, making the famous pirate slouching in the reclining chair sit up straight. Klein looked away, said nothing, and went into the washroom. He closed the door behind him, took out the paper figurine, disguised himself, and went above the grey fog, ready to make another divination. Before, he had considered the potential risks of Bansi Harbor, but now, after the wind had picked up, he intended to confirm the current level of danger. Bansi Harbor is dangerous. Klein held the spirit pendulum and began to recite the statement in a low voice. After repeating this over and over again, he opened his eyes and discovered that, although the topaz pendant was rotating clockwise, it wasn't spinning at a fast frequency or with large amplitudes. There's danger, but it's within acceptable limits. This is in contradiction to the revelation from before. Klein whispered to himself as he leaned his elbows on the edge of the long bronze table. He quickly thought of one possibility, and that was that the current danger wasn't equal to the dormant danger. Only by triggering something or investigating it thoroughly would the iceberg hidden beneath the sea appear. This dormant danger might have existed for 300 or 400 years, or perhaps even longer, and not because of my arrival. The current danger might even have nothing to do with the dormant danger. It's a pity that I don't have the necessary information to make a divination based on this conjecture. After interpreting, Klein quickly returned to the real world, left the washroom, and found a chair to sit on. He was silent, hesitant, and didn't move for a long time, which made Blazing Danitz feel strangely uneasy. Ever since Gehrman Sparrow mentioned that there was danger lurking in Bansi Harbor, this infamous pirate had been constantly worried. To be able to make this monster change his mind and avoid the danger at Green Lemon Restaurant, it must be very terrifying. Why is my vacation so miserable? I'm plagued with bad luck. The atmosphere was so stifling that Danitz had to get up and pace back and forth. It was then that he saw the monster, Gehrman Sparrow, suddenly stand up, button his double-breasted frock coat, and walk over to the coat rack by the door. After taking his silk hat, Klein looked at Blazing and said without any expression, "You're free." Huh. Danitz only found it surreal. He suddenly understood what the monster was thinking of doing, and he blurted out in shock, "You want to save the captain and those ordinary people? Why, you were the one who said it's dangerous outside." Klein put on his half-top hat, picked up his black wooden cane, twisted the door handle, and replied calmly, "They cooperated with me. They kept my secret for me. He treated me to murloc meat. He helped me pay compensation for White Shark's loss." Danitz didn't react for a moment. Subconsciously, he asked, "How much was the compensation?" "A few soli." Klein opened the door and walked out. Madman. This fellow is completely mad. Be it his treatment to others or himself, he's a madman. Danitz's mouth was half open as he felt speechless. Luckily, I'm a normal person. I'll stay in a safe place. Danitz retracted his gaze and thought in mockery and amusement. Just as this thought came to him, the wind howled again, rattling the windows and causing the candles in the room to flicker. Looking at this dark and turbulent scene, Danitz suddenly thought of a problem. The ship is anchored in the harbor, which was also part of Bansi Harbor. It's not safe either, and it could also be in danger. If I were to stay here on my own, then I might as well follow that monster. At least, he's very strong. He ran out of room 312 and caught up with Klein just as he was about to leave the cabin. Klein turned his head to glance at him. Although he didn't say anything, his puzzlement was very evident. Danitz hurriedly laughed. If I were to choose to retreat in the face of such trivial risks, I'll be mocked by all the pirates of the Sonia Sea. An excuse. Without exposing him, Klein borrowed a lantern from the crew. Carrying the dim yellow lantern and holding his hard wooden cane, he walked alongside the boat and entered the dim port in his black suit. As Danitz lamented, he followed closely beside him. Chapter 508, Don't Go Out Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Unlike mainland cities such as Backlund, Tingen, and Pritz Harbor, colonial islands such as Bansi Harbor lacked gas. The lamps lining the two sides of the street were sparse. They had candles caged in glass, waiting to be lit. Unfortunately, the wind had picked up early, so no one went out in the evening. The candles didn't shine at the predetermined time, and the road was pitch black. The faint outline of the crimson moon shone through the clouds. Compared to before, the wind was much calmer. At the very least, Klein didn't need to be distracted keeping his hat on. The thin fog gradually pervaded the air, and the doors and windows of the mainly two-story houses were shut tight. It was pitch black and devoid of any light, as though no one had lived in the area for a long time. With a yellow lantern in one hand and a hard wooden cane in the other, Klein walked quickly down the quiet street in the direction of the Green Lemon restaurant which Blazing Danitz had pointed out. Whoosh! Amidst the fog, the wind began to swirl as Klein felt a baffling chill down his neck. He lifted his right hand, which held the cane, and propped up the collar of his double-breasted frock coat, completely covering his neck. It was at this moment that a scene suddenly appeared in his mind. In the scene, a black shadow the size of a watermelon appeared from the fog and lunged for his ear. Without thinking, Klein swung his arm and forearm and struck out with his cane. Bam! Just as the black shadow came close, it was struck head-on and sent flying a long distance away. With the help of the lantern's light, Klein finally recognized the thing that had attacked him. It was a head. It was a head that had lost its body, a head that had its esophagus hanging down. The head floated in midair, its face resembling dried cheese with mildew all over it. There was a yellowish-green liquid flowing down its skin as it outlined the face's contours. There were only 2 black holes left where its nose was supposed to be. Its bulging eyes were mostly white without much black. Its lips were mostly rotten, revealing sharpened teeth mixed with blood. T. Blazing Danitz silently cursed when he saw this scene, his heart trembling. Even though he had embarked on many treasure hunts and had fought many monsters, such a disgusting and horrifying thing was still rare. At some point in time, a classic revolver had appeared in his hand, and he was about to fire it with his elbow held down. At this moment, he saw a pure ray of light descend from the sky, landing on the somewhat stiff head. Ah! A blood-curdling screech rang out, and the shriveled and hideous head was quickly vaporized before dissolving into ashes. It didn't leave a single trace behind. How weak! Danitz subconsciously commented. Is this monster, Gehrman Sparrow, from the Sun Pathway? Doesn't look like it. He likely relied on what should be some sort of mystical item. I didn't even realize it just now, but Gehrman Sparrow had already discovered the enemy and attacked. He really is very strong. Danitz quickly turned his attention to something else. Just as his thoughts were settling down, he saw a similar head fly out from the fog to his side from the corner of his eye. It was trying to bite his neck. Bang! Danitz calmly pulled the trigger. The brass bullet accurately hit the head covered in mold, shattering the head's glabella as it fell backwards and stopped in midair. Soon after, a crimson ball quickly expanded above Danitz's empty left palm, and a fiery light began to swirl. He leaned forward and dragged his arm before throwing the fireball, causing it to crash into the stiff head. Flames soared up as the head burned red. The skin on the head quickly charred, emitting a sizzling sound. However, it lunged forward with its mouth wide open, ready to bite Danitz's neck as though it wasn't affected. This turn of events was somewhat out of Danitz's expectations. He nearly failed to dodge in time, and he hurriedly rolled forward, barely dodging fatal damage. A bright scarlet color appeared on his left palm once again, but the flame didn't expand this time. Instead, it shrunk, layer by layer. Within a second, Danitz threw out the orange fireball, which was only the size of an eye, while dodging. The fireball was controlled by his spirituality. It drew an arc in the air and accurately flew into the mouth of the shriveled head. Boom! The fiery light flashed, and the explosion splintered the flying head from the inside out. Countless pieces of it, along with its blood, splashed everywhere. I finally finished it. Danitz rolled to his feet and breathed a sigh of relief. Only then did he realize that this monster which only had a head wasn't easy to deal with. Yet, Gehrman Sparrow had killed one with ease. It's mainly because the beyonder powers in the sun domain restrain such things. Danitz added scornfully in his heart. As he thought of this, he turned his head to the side and realized that Gehrman Sparrow hadn't waited for him. With his cane and lantern, he was jogging into the distance, his black coat fluttering behind him slightly. Dogsh *T. Wait for me. Wait for me. Danitz's pupils contracted as he widened his pace to chase after the man. He didn't dare to stay on his own in the thin fog and dim surroundings. Inside the Green Lemon restaurant, Donna looked at the white porcelain bowl in front of her and the dark red blood cakes in it. She thought of the strange horror she felt when seeing the customers eating just now, as well as the blood oozing out of the headless cloaked man's neck. Her throat moved and she almost vomited. Donna decided to give up the delicacy, even though the fragrance had already seeped into her nose. She ate some salad and mashed potatoes without much thought and waited for the wind outside to die down. She felt the clock on the wall moving ever so slowly. Time passed by the second. The customers at the table paid their bills and left the second floor. The second floor became quieter and quieter as it turned emptier and emptier. Thud. 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 Donna felt that the sound of feet on the wooden steps as they descended were frustrating. Finally, she noticed that the trees outside were no longer swaying, and the ground was littered with all sorts of junk. The wind has stopped, Donna said, pointing excitedly to the window. Her father, an import and export merchant, Bertie Branch, pinched his forehead and growled, "Where's your table manners, Donna?" But, just as Donna was about to argue, Cleves raised his palm and pressed it down. "It's 7:40 p.m. and we're almost done with dinner. Let's head back as soon as possible. There are many nasty legends about the night in Bansi Harbor." Every merchant who depended on the sea for a living was more or less superstitious, especially when it came to the legends of the natives. Therefore, Bertie fell silent and agreed with Cleves's suggestion. He quickly foot the bill and led his family and bodyguards down to the first floor. Cleves was about to open the door to find his way when a creaking sound came from a nearby room. Donna almost screamed out in fright and gripped Denton's hand tightly. A figure walked out, glanced at them, and calmly said, "It's fogged up. It's best not to go out." The figure wore a black tailcoat without a hat. There was a pair of glasses on the bridge of his nose. His face was fleshy and almost circular. "What are you trying to convey, Mr. Fox?" Cleves recognized him to be the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant. Fox said without much of an expression, "In Bansi, during the nights when the fog and weather drastically changes, it's best not to go out or respond to any knockings. Otherwise, one might encounter bad things." The more Donna listened, the more scared she became. She loudly emphasized, "People have already left ahead of us." Fox pointed to the rooms on the first floor. "They chose to stay." Creak. Thud. As soon as Fox's voice fell, the doors to the various rooms opened either softly or heavily. The gentlemen and ladies from before came to the doors and quietly watched Donna and her family, who were considering to leave. "Perhaps we should respect the customs here," Bertie Branch said in deliberation. "Staying a night here won't affect our boarding of the ship." According to the experience Cleves was equipped with, he should have followed Fox's advice and stayed at the Green Lemon restaurant, but he remembered Gehrman Sparrow's reminder. It was a reminder of a powerful adventurer who was watching Blazing Danitz. There is danger dormant in Bansi Harbor. It doesn't refer to it being indoors or outdoors. Cleves quickly made his decision and said to Ertie, "Mr. Branch, please trust in my profession." "Yeah, I've seen a lot of folklore, but none of them are pragmatic," another bodyguard agreed. Before he finished his sentence, knocking sounds came from the restaurant's door and a series of screams could be heard from afar. "Look, there are knocking sounds." "Don't respond," Fox said slowly. Bertie's heart palpitated as he was about to choose to stay the night. Donna looked at the gentlemen and ladies standing at their doorways, and she felt that their gazes looked abnormally weird. "No, we have to return," the young lady stressed, almost screaming. Clevis could also feel the indescribable pressure and the coldness that seeped through his bones, and he once again stressed his opinion. "If there are any problems, then it'll be more dangerous staying here. There are cannons on the ship, as well as sailors with guns and sabers." This reason convinced Ertie, who motioned for Clevis to open the door. Clevis waited for the knocking to subside, then with one hand holding a gun, he pulled open the door with the other. The wind's howling had quietened and the darkness was deep amidst the spreading fog. It was as if there were many monsters hidden within. Donna held her younger brother, Denton, and, hiding behind Cecile, left the restaurant one step at a time. Creak. The door to the restaurant suddenly closed, preventing them from returning. At this moment, they were like ships stranded in a storm, as though they were the only ones left in this world. With the lantern in hand, Clevis walked in front when he suddenly saw something fly over and crash into the ground, rolling a few times. Donna and the others subconsciously looked over and immediately let out cries of terror. It was a shriveled, rotting head. Then they saw light. Light fell from the sky, and the disgusting head melted into nothingness. This, Bertie and the others swallowed hard, their bodies trembling. At that moment, they saw a faint yellow light approaching from the depths of the fog. It was a figure holding a lantern, wearing a half-top hat and a double-breasted frock coat which shared the same color as the night. The lines of his face were distinct, and there was an obvious sharpness in the coldness. "Uncle Sparrow!" Donna and Denton cried out. They felt their hearts settle down. Klein tossed the lantern to Danitz beside him, and he walked over with his cane in hand before calmly saying to Clevis and the others as if nothing was out of the ordinary, "Let's go to the telegraph office first." "What about the Timothus?" Chapter 509, Request Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios, Timothus? "They're still in the restaurant," Bertie Branch subconsciously replied. He then pointed to the area where the moldy head had been purified and anxiously asked, "What was that just now?" Maintaining Gehrman Sparrow's persona, Klein didn't answer and glanced at Danitz before walking directly past Donna's family to the tightly closed door of the Green Lemon restaurant. Blazing Danitz held his lantern and was relieved having finally completed a goal. He straightened his back, looked at Ertie and the others, and scoffed. "You don't have to worry about what that was. Just know that it's a monster that will harm you." If Gehrman Sparrow wasn't only a few meters away, he even wanted to proclaim, "Only I, Lord Blazing Danitz, can protect you." Clevis exchanged glances with Cecile and Teague before taking the initiative to step forward. He comforted his employers and said, "Leave your questions to after we get back to the White Agate." Frankly speaking, the three bodyguards had all been adventurers for varying periods of time. However, their understanding of monsters was still stuck at the level of folklore or stories of their drunken peers. They still found it rather surreal, as though they were in a dream. However, since they had seen creatures like murlocs before, it wasn't that hard to accept other things. At most, they were a little weirder and uglier than murlocs. When they thought of this, their hearts calmed significantly, and the guns in their hands seemed to regain their strength. However, the pure light that descended from the sky still exceeded their scope of understanding. They only felt that their worldview, outlook on life, and values that had long been formed had begun wavering. All they could do was temporarily ignore it, suppressing all their emotions to the bottom of their hearts. Klein stopped at the door of the Green Lemon restaurant, raised his right hand, and tapped it with his fingers. Thump. 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 After he knocked 3 times in a rhythmic fashion, no one answered and there was silence. If not for the candlelight shining through the windows and the cracks in the door, Klein would have thought it was an empty building that had long been abandoned. Thump. 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 He knocked 3 more times. Within the restaurant, the silence continued. Everyone seemed to be abiding by the custom of not responding to any knocking in foggy weather. Klein retracted his right hand and patted the hem of his double-breasted frock coat. Suddenly, he leaned back, lifted his knees, and kicked his right foot forward. With a bang, the restaurant's door suddenly opened wide, and all the nails that had fixed the copper lock popped out. Wearing a tailcoat, the boss, Fox, with his pudgy, nearly round face was still standing in his original position. The ladies and gentlemen who had chosen to stay the night all opened the doors one by one and stood quietly at the door, looking over without a word. "What do you want?" Fox didn't flare up, his tone the same as before. However, he had a revolver in his hand. With his spirit vision activated, Klein turned his head and looked around. He didn't find any traces of evil on any of the humans present. His gaze landed on the boss of the restaurant, and his gaze turned heavy. He looked into the owner's eyes and asked, "Where's the Timothy family?" Fox repressed his emotions, as though a storm was brewing in his dark brown eyes while he looked at the man for 2 seconds. Finally, he unnaturally turned his head and said, "There's another table. Foreigners. Upstairs. Get them to come down," Klein ordered coldly. Fox was silent for a few seconds, until the man quickly drew his gun and aimed it at his head. He took a deep breath and sent a waiter up to the second floor, leading the Timothy family down the stairs. What happened? Timothy was a man who was more than 30 years of age. He was on vacation with his newly wedded wife. Klein lowered his gun and flatly said, "Something unexpected has happened in Bansi Harbor. Are you coming back with me to the ship or staying here?" "Something unexpected?" While Timothy ruminated over the words, he saw Erdy Branch outside nodding at him solemnly. He knew that the other party was a very rich import and export merchant who had 3 bodyguards with him. He believed that if there were any unexpected circumstances, then it would be safer to stay with them, so the answer was obvious. As for the unique customs of Bansi Harbor, it was just a custom. He held his wife's hand and walked towards the door, politely smiling as he said, "All our things are on the ship. Of course we'll stick with you." "Thank you." He and his new wife expressed their gratitude in unison, walked past Klein, and joined with the Branch family outside. Klein withdrew his revolver, politely bowed at Fox and said, "Excuse us." With that, he turned around and walked towards Cleves and company, who were illuminated by the light leaking out from the restaurant. With a thud, the door of the Green Lemon restaurant closed once again, swaying slightly in the wind. Klein had actually noticed an unusual, subtle atmosphere just now, but since his spirit vision failed to obtain anything, he didn't wish to investigate it too deeply, lest he ignite the huge danger lurking in Bansi Harbor. He returned to Dannett's side and did a head count with the light of the lantern. Donna's family of 4, their 3 bodyguards, the Timothy couple, and several servants are all present. Klein switched the hands in which he held his revolver and cane with, lifted his gun-wielding right hand, slipped it deep into the double-breasted frock coat, and rubbed the sun brooch. With a flash of dark golden light, an invisible force quickly spread outwards, flooding everyone present like a wave. Instantly, Donna and the others felt as if they had arrived in the south, like they were bathing in warm sunlight that dispersed the cold chill within their bodies. They were no longer as nervous and worried, as if they had found their courage again. The remnant black colors obtained from the special cured meat from Demir Harbor quickly disappeared along with the extremely minute amounts of wicked feelings. Sun Halo was able to enhance the courage of one's companions within a 20-meter radius and purify any evil forces within them. With the help of the brooch and while under the control of Klein's spirituality and psyche, he could use the power of the sun to bypass any targets he didn't wish to help. "Let's head to the telegraph office first," Klein repeated himself as he held his cane in his left hand and his revolver in his right. After getting his bearings, he proceeded forward. Danitz followed his directions and walked diagonally to the side. Cleves, Cecile, and Teague very professionally took charge of security for the other 2 flanks. With a party of more than 15 people, it's easy for us to suffer losses once we're attacked. Moreover, only blazing can truly be considered a helper. What should I do? Thinking back to the monsters he had encountered, Klein suddenly slipped the revolver back into his underarm holster and handed the cane to his right palm. He reached into his pocket with his left hand and removed the wall of spirituality around an iron cigar case. He took out Azek's copper whistle and held it in his hand, occasionally tossing it up. He believed that such an action would divert the attention of the undead monsters, which only had one head left from the others, leaving the brass, ancient whistle as the only thing in their eyes. This way, I don't have to worry about not being able to rescue them in time. That's the effect of an MT1. Klein sighed and quickened his pace. At this moment, 3 shriveled heads covered in mold flew out from the thin fog in front of him. They charged towards Klein from different directions like arrows, completely ignoring the existence of the other delicious meat. 3. Dannett's pupils contracted, a little worried that Gehrman Sparrow would end up flustered, but he also looked forward to seeing his true strength. 3. Klein calmly shook his left hand and threw Azek's whistle into the air. The heads with esophaguses hanging down from them immediately drew an arc and headed for their primary target. Klein took a step back and, without any expression, raised his hand and squeezed the sun brooch. All of a sudden, dense golden flames were produced where the copper whistle was as a holy aura was emanated. Fire of light. The 3 skinny heads let out miserable shrieks at the same time, turning into dust under the golden light. Klein took 2 steps forward and reached out to catch Azek's copper whistle. That can actually work. Another mystical item. Danitz froze for 2 seconds, flabbergasted at how easily the assault had been resolved. At that moment, Timothy and his wife also clearly saw what the things which were attacking them looked like. One of them turned pale from fright while the other asked, flustered, what was that? Donna immediately turned around and nodded seriously. Leave your questions to after we get back to the white agate. With that said, she put her finger to her lips, mimicking Uncle Sparrow's meaning of silence. Remembering the holy aura displayed by the young man in front of him, Timothy swallowed hard and pulled at his wife's hand. He fell silent while remaining alert, and his servants had no choice but to obey upon seeing this. The group continued on through the moonlit streets. The lights of the houses on either side of the streets were extinguished, leaving only darkness behind the oriel windows. Donna felt as if pairs of eyes were following her and the others, but for some reason no one showed up. They must all be afraid of Uncle Sparrow. She held her brother's hand tight and walked amidst the protective circle of her parents. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the side of the street. He wore a black cloak and leaned forward, revealing a neck that was still bleeding. There was nothing above the neck, with the interior of the cloak reflecting the moonlight. Gasp! The headless figure let out a beast-like growl that sounded like gasping as it rushed towards Klein, stomping on the street to the point that the ground slightly shook. A spot it passed by just happened to be in Dannett's path. This infamous pirate cursed and flung an orange-yellow fireball which had been repeatedly compressed from his hand. Boom! The fireball exploded, causing the headless man to retreat several steps. His clothes were tattered, and his skin quickly charred while his cloak was set on fire. However, to the monsters that had already lost their lives, this wasn't a serious injury. And in that instant, with a crisp crack, the scarlet flame on the black cloak suddenly soared into the air, as if it were blooming. Klein, in his coat, jumped out of the flames, borrowing the momentum from his fall and his own strength in order to stab the cane he held in both hands directly into the headless man's neck. Splat! The cane sank into the headless man's body and emerged from his crotch. Bam! Klein's back muscles bulged, forcefully throwing the headless monster to the ground. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he stood behind the monster and continued to grip the cane tightly while he poured his spirituality into the sun brooch. He had already used his spirit vision to determine that holy light summoning, cleave of purification, and fire of light were all unable to deal with this blackish-green monster in a short amount of time, so he could only use another method. 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. The headless man struggled with all his might, but like a snake, he fell to his knees and was firmly nailed to the ground by the cane. 2 seconds, 1 second. Klein opened his mouth and spat out a word in ancient Hermes. Sun. Specks of radiance appeared and turned into water droplets that sprinkled over the headless man's body. Sizzle. When the blackish-green gas was emitted, Klein let go of his cane and took 2 steps to the side. Within the sparse rain, the headless man continuously twitched before finally calming down, eventually melting into a pool of blood. No beyonder characteristics. This means it's not the real enemy. At most, it can be considered as a created servant. Klein withdrew his cane, turned, and walked back to the group. So cool. Denton let out a belated cheer. Donna's eyes sparkled. He was still borrowing the powers of a mystical item. However, his phasing away during the flames has indicated his true strength. He really isn't easy to deal with. Blazing Danitz retracted his gaze, feeling that his decision not to mindlessly run off had been extremely wise. 7 or 8 minutes later, the group that cleared out 2 more waves of monsters arrived at the Bansi Port's telegraph office. Cleves took the initiative and knocked on the door. Who is it? A gentle female voice came from inside. We're looking for the captain of the White Agate, Mr. Eland, Cleves answered through the door. In the quiet night, the woman's voice spoke at a moderate pace. He and his first mate went next door to the cathedral. The person speaking sounds odd, or is she like that only on similar nights? Klein flicked a gold coin and confirmed that she wasn't lying. As they were preparing to leave, the female voice in the telegraph office hesitated and said, Can you guys, help me, take note of someone? He's my colleague. He went out before the wind started tonight, and never came back. His name is Pavo Court. Chapter 510, The Returning Bishop Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Pavo Court. Cleves didn't directly answer the woman behind the telegraph office's door. He turned to glance at Gehrman Sparrow, waiting for his decision. In the eyes of this former adventurer, it was a difficult task for 15 people to get back to the White Agate safely. They couldn't and shouldn't be distracted by helping her search for someone. However, he was well aware that the current pillar of support was Gehrman Sparrow and Blazing Danitz. They were the only ones who had the right to decide on the matter. Klein remained silent for 2 seconds, then he spoke in a measured voice. What does he look like? He believed that having more information would help him escape this strange, foggy city, so he casually asked in passing. As for whether he would help take note of the person's whereabouts, it all depended on what happened next. While inquiring, Klein also warned himself not to pursue the matter too deeply or else it might risk triggering the danger dormant in Bansi Harbor. Between understanding the situation and avoiding the risks, he had to engage in a balancing act, no more, no less, without leaning too far left or right. This might be an easy or difficult feat, because no one knew what would happen once he took the step. He could only judge based on his experience and intuition, and he could fall into a pit at any time. This left Klein highly stressed as his mind whirled at an unprecedented speed. In the dense darkness and thin fog, the telegraph office's door remained tightly shut. The woman inside paused and said, He's a very handsome man. He has 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, and a mouth. Why does this answer sound so scary? Is there something wrong with this woman? According to the customs of Bansi Harbor, she shouldn't have even responded. Blazing Danitz had the urge to kick open the door, rush into the telegraph office, and check the situation inside. It was at this moment that he saw Gehrman Sparrow put his hand on his hat and turn to the side. Storm Cathedral, Klein briefly stated their destination. He didn't bother with whether there was anything wrong with the woman at the telegraph office. It was just like how he didn't delve into the secrets of the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant or the customers who had chosen to stay the night. The wind was getting lighter, and the fog was thinning. The candlelight from the cathedral was shining through the narrow windows high above, like a beacon in a storm. After Klein used Sun Halo again, Donna and the others regained some of their courage, like people who had fallen into the water and desperately grabbed onto the last straw. They hurriedly walked on the empty streets in silence. Soon they arrived outside the Storm Cathedral, but the doors were shut tight. Glancing at the Storm's sacred emblem on the door, Klein raised his hand and knocked 3 times. Thump. 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 A vigilant male voice immediately came from behind the door. "Who is it?" "Gehrman Sparrow," Klein replied straight away. He could already tell that it was Captain Eland. "Why are you here?" Eland asked again without opening the door. Klein raised his cane and calmly said, "You helped me pay White Shark's compensation." After a moment of surprise and amusement, Eland made an initial confirmation that it was the real Gehrman Sparrow outside. At the very least, even a monster adept at disguising wouldn't have known something that was privy only to the two of them. He still felt hesitant until Clevis, Bertie Branch, Donna, and company sounded out in succession. Only then did he relax and allow his first mate, Harris, to unlock and open the door. A heavy clunking sound rang out, and Klein saw Eland in his boat-shaped hat, sword in one hand, and musket in the other. Something happened here too, he keenly asked, based on his conclusion from the situations from before. Eland stepped aside to let Donna and the others in. Then he pointed at the prayer hall and said, "The priest I knew, Jace, died in there. He was decapitated, and Bishop Millet is nowhere to be found. Same for the other priests. Also, the servants in the church are all gone. A dead priest with a missing bishop. The whole cathedral is devoid of the living. This is a little problematic." Klein gripped the cold Azek's copper whistle, his heart sinking. Of course, he was very clear that the priest and the bishop weren't the main force of the Church of Storm that managed Beyonder matters in Banshee Harbor. Underneath this cathedral, there was definitely a mandated Punisher team formed out of 6 to 8 Beyonders, as well as an indefinite number of sealed artifacts. Even high-sequence Beyonders wouldn't be able to wipe out this force in a short span of time without causing a stir. As long as they're alive and able to use sealed artifacts, the problem shouldn't be too terrible. So, at this point in time, what is the mandated Punisher team doing? Based on his previous experience as a Nighthawk, Klein made a guess of the standard operating procedures. In the process, he followed Eland to the prayer hall and examined the body of the deceased priest. Jace died a tragic death, as if his head had been decapitated while he was still alive. Unlike the monsters outside, his esophagus and head were separated. With Klein's spirit vision, this priest no longer had any remnant spirit. It would be very difficult to have a successful spirit channeling ritual. Is it due to a unique killing technique, or has it been dealt with accordingly? It's different from the monsters outside. Was it because the operation happened in a rush? Combining all that he knew, Klein concluded his previous speculation. He felt that there were 2 possibilities. 1, there was something of local origins, perhaps a living sealed artifact or a mid-sequence Beyonder, who had lost control underground. It escaped the cathedral and killed Jace while fleeing, causing the abnormal changes in Banshee Harbor. The bishop, priests, and mandated punishers were in desperate pursuit, attempting to form a seal again or get rid the perpetrator. The servants had been led underground and were under the protection of the remaining mandated punishers. But this didn't explain the strange behavior of the residents of Banshee Harbor. The second possibility was that the primitive sacrifice ritual to the god of weather had been resurrected in a number of people in Banshee Harbor, and that the flying heads and headless monsters were in adherence with the descriptions of flesh and blood consumption in the sacrificial rituals and the burying of heads in the altar. And due to some unknown reason, this group of people had raided the cathedral and killed Reverend Jess. The rest of the population had more or less understood the situation, but they had opted for silence. They might have already assaulted the area underground and are currently engaged in an intense battle with the mandated punishers, priests, and the bishop, who are aided by sealed artifacts. They might have transformed all the servants into monsters or thrown them out. It can also be that they're under pursuit from the Beyonders of the Church of Storms, and the servants have been sent underground to receive protection to prevent any accidents. From the fact that Jace's corpse hasn't been used, there's a possibility that it's the latter development. If I were to head underground to confirm the situation, I'll definitely be attacked since we're unfamiliar Beyonders. Besides, the remnant strength might not be sufficient. Klein looked at the priest on the ground and realized that his Beyonder characteristic had condensed into a blue sapphire by his neck. He retracted his gaze and didn't pick up the item. He didn't want to attract the violent retaliation from the short-tempered Church of Storms, so he turned to Eland and Harris. Let's return to the ship first. He casually tossed the gold coin and confirmed that there was no battle currently going on underground. In any case, regardless of whether there were any mandated punishers present, the cathedral grounds were no longer suitable for prolonged stays. After all, Klein wasn't sure if his guess was right, and he could only make the safest choice. All right. Eland had no desire to stay here either, being in a situation where he waited nervously for any changes to befall him. As long as he returned to the White Agate, he would have many cannons and many sailors that could withstand accidents to a certain extent. After a short rest, the group left the cathedral. With the addition of Eland and Harris, the team's defense clearly became much tighter. Klein no longer needed to toss the copper whistle to attract the monsters, so he stuffed it back into his pocket. Shall we send a telegram to the Church of Storms headquarters to report on Bansi Harbor? After a few steps, Eland made a cautious suggestion. This way, even if there were major unforeseen events, as long as they held on, they would eventually be saved. Klein didn't object. Walking through the thin fog ahead of him, he calmly said, "We'll pass by the telegraph office." Phew. Blazing Danitz breathed a sigh of relief, then his heart skipped a beat. He was afraid that the Church of Storms would perform investigations and discover that an infamous pirate had played an important role in this matter, and by then, he would probably still be trapped on the White Agate. Although I save people, the mandated punishers aren't friendly to those who don't belong to them, especially when I'm a pirate. Stumped for a moment, Danitz decided to get over the immediate danger before considering other matters. After walking for a while, they saw the telegraph office in sight. A faint yellow light suddenly emerged from the side street and approached them from the depths of the fog. It was a middle-aged man carrying a lantern. It was a middle-aged man carrying a hurricane lamp. He wore a dark blue bishop robe embroidered with the symbol of the storm. His head was bowed and his face was pale. He was wheezing as he staggered while walking. Eland focused and blurted out, "Bishop Millet." The middle-aged man looked up, raised his hurricane lamp and said, "Eland, is it?" At this moment, Klein took a step back, letting Eland stand out. He didn't wish for the bishop of the Church of Storms to pay notice to him. Danitz even shrunk his neck back, using Erdy's plump body to block himself. "Yes, Your Excellency. Jace is dead." "What happened?" Eland wasn't a novice, so he didn't directly step forward. Bishop Millet coughed and said, "An old custom has been revived, and a group of heathens with dirty blood running through their veins are beginning to offer live sacrifices and are consuming their flesh and blood. Jace noticed that they were problematic and ended up being killed by them. The matter can no longer be covered up. They used the sacrificial ritual to change the weather and tried to attack the cathedral. They were defeated by the mandated Punisher and fled to the mountain. They escaped to the cave where the altar is. I was injured in combat. Without being able to hold out much longer, all I could do was slowly make my way back." Just as he finished speaking, a bright ball of light burst out of the distant fog, as if countless bolts of lightning were striking down. With the help of this light, Klein and the others could see the fog-covered mountain range by the shore, as well as the peak which was connected to thunderstorms. To a certain extent, this confirmed Bishop Millet's claim. Eland was about to step forward to support the storm bishop when he saw Gehrman Sparrow take out a gold coin and mutter in a low voice, "He has ill intentions." Ding! The gold coin flew up and then tumbled in the air before landing in Klein's palm, heads facing up. It meant a positive result. Bishop Millet stared straight at this scene, his light brown eyes suddenly flashing with a dark red light.